I was probably about 20 and had just come to a place where I could open up a little bit to what God wanted to do in me and what he wanted to do with me. And I was so captured. I was on a track to go into pre-law, and I was really captured by the pastor who was there at our church, or the church that I attended there in Houston. His name was Cliff, still is Cliff. And he was powerful and dynamic and compelling, and I'd never really heard or been to church where someone seemed like they were speaking right at me and challenging me. And when I kind of came to a place where I thought maybe God might have for me to be a pastor, I remember two things came to my mind. Number one, I remember thinking, how can I be like that? He's so compelling and dynamic, and I don't know if I can be that. And on the other end of it, I had started taking classes, and there was the venerable Dr. Jones. And I remember thinking, he's so smart, and he's so knowledgeable. How could I ever be that? And one morning, I was taking a walk, and I had my little scriptures with me, about this big little Bible, and I was reading and thinking, and a thought came to me, and I don't know if it was my own or not, but I found some real freedom from in the midst, and here it is. It was like God, by his Spirit, kind of spoke into me a little bit and said, I didn't call you to be Cliff. I didn't call you to be Dr. Jones. I'm calling you the way I made you. We started talking last week about what it is to grow. And in the Church of God, we have a mistake. And the mistake is this. We think if we pump you full of information and doctrine that you've grown, and you haven't necessarily grown at all. You just know some more doctrine, or you have some additions to things that you believe. But that doesn't necessarily change the kind of person you are. And so when we talk about growing, we're not talking about information accumulation. And we're not even talking about doctrinal fine-tuning. We're talking about growing in terms of who you're becoming. The sort of person you're becoming. You're either moving toward God as far as in some sort of reflection of him, or else you're not. Sometimes there are folks that aren't growing up, they're growing down. So it's a burden to me to say it's important for me to maybe try to define a little bit about growing, so we've got a better idea of it, and so that maybe we can engage it a little bit more and actually grow. Last week we took a look just at the idea of a change of perspective is usually a trigger for growth. If I see something a little bit differently, or I gain some clarity about some things, that can be a trigger for me to grow. You follow me? Yeah? That's the interactive part there. We'll try it again. You follow what I'm saying? When we gain some clarity, that opens a door for us to begin to grow. It triggers something for us. And when I see, listen to me, when I see my life the way God sees my life, that's a trigger for me to grow. I'm not coming to you, Tyler. But also, if I see my life the way God sees my life, it puts me in a position where I can begin to realize my potentials. If you have your bulletin, you'll notice on the front it says to recognize potential, something clever like that. Is that right? Is that right? Recognize potential. What you'll want to do is get a pen, pencil, whatever, as far as something you'll be able to mark with, and put a line through recognize. That's not Mel's fault at all. She put in what I'd given her for that. I just realized that I probably need to change it from recognize to realize. Maybe we don't know the difference on that just yet, but just trust me on it. We grow when we begin to realize our potential. If you have your Bibles, there's just a couple of verses I'd like to look at and use for us for this morning. It's from Psalm 119. Now, this is kind of the for what it's worth section, but do you know that Psalm 119 is the largest or the longest chapter in the Bible? I won't be preaching from all of it. There's 176 verses, so I'm probably not going to get all of them. But you know what they did? You know why that psalm is so long? Because they took the Hebrew alphabet and they started with what they would call Aleph. And then that section starting Psalm 119, he starts with the letter Aleph and he writes for a time. And then when he concludes that, he moves to the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet, right, which is Bet. And so he would then write a section that started with that letter. Then there was Gimel, and he would do that, and then there was Dalet, and so forth. Okay, so the whole chapter is the idea of we're going to take the very building blocks of language that they knew and use it to talk about the Word of God. It's fascinating. We're going to look at just 2 verses, though. This is where they start with the Yod, and it's in verse 73. Just going to do just that verse. Your hands made me and fashioned me. So give me understanding so that I can learn your commands. Okay, this verse breaks into 3 ready sections for us. The first one is simply this. There's a basic acknowledgement about that God made him. Kind of seems kind of obvious, but I want to dig in just a little bit on this. There's a basic acknowledgement that God made him. This isn't a news flash, but let's put it there because this is the stuff of humility. You didn't make yourself. You weren't there when you were made. There were forces and sources of your origin. You had a beginning. Someone made you. And you say, yeah, I know, I got my parents. But you know what? Back of all that, God made you. And that's the stuff of humility. You see why? The self-made man isn't really self-made. What we do with the self that God gives us, that's something. But the point of the psalm here is that you didn't make yourself. God made you. So he's the source of your life. You see that? Psalm 119:73. You made me. And so that's the source. But we've got to go a little bit further with it. Because to the humility that comes from just realizing God made me, there is the significance of that. God made you. That's a significant life. That's a significant statement. God made you. You are made by God, and you matter to God, and his fingerprints are on you. He made you. He does not make useless things. He doesn't make valueless things. The fact that God made you is very significant. And it makes you and your life very significant. It's not that just anyone did something and put you together. God made you. So you've got the humility that we didn't make ourselves. We are under his good hand. But we also have the dignity that God made me. And he doesn't make useless things. That does something in me. But the psalm goes a little bit further. He doesn't just say, you made me. Do you see what else he says? He presses on. He says, your hand fashioned me. This is the language of craftsmanship and artistry. I'm married to an artist. Did you all know that? Just hope Jen doesn't find out. Just joking. No, Jennifer is a gifted artist. And I'm not. But there's 2 things that I've noticed about that. One is there's always stuff that she thinks can be repurposed and recreated and all that sort of stuff. So we don't lack for stuff in our house. We have a sofa in our van that we purchased in Denver this past week because I could paint that. And you know what I said? Yes, dear. There's much about art that I don't get. There's much about craftsmanship that I don't get. But I do know this. There have been times where Jen has told someone, I will do this for you. And the artist comes out. And what happens there is that there is creative intent and particular intent in that work that she does. It's not just smack it together and send it out and slap it together. When she has told people, especially those who are dear to her, I will do this for you, There is creative and particular intent in what she's doing. Her hand is fashioning something. So here's the first part in the psalm that acknowledges something really important. God made you. That's the stuff of humility. But God made you, which means you are significant more than you know. And then it presses on. His hand fashioned you. That's the acknowledgement. And that's piece number one. Here's piece number two. And there's some question of which way it goes. But piece number two in that verse is, so give me understanding. That's a prayer and that's a request. God, give me understanding. Here's the question. Does it go with the phrase that just preceded it? Or does it go with the phrase that follows it? So that I can learn your way? Or does it give me understanding on how you've made me? I think the answer is C, all of the above. And I'd like to look at this a little bit to say, we can't realize our potential if we've not understood that God's made us, and if we've not asked the question, how, God, have you made me? I'd like to walk us through a little bit there. I think we're serious about growing when we ask the question, God, you've made me, now give me understanding. How have you made me? When we talk about how God's made us, there's a handful of things that I'd like us to kind of look at. Here's one. How has God made you in terms of what some people call creation gifts? Do you know? Have you learned how God's made you? How has God made you in terms of temperament and personality? He did that. He's formed your temperament and your personality. Are you turned to be a little more outgoing? Or are you turned a little more inward? God made that. What are you? Are you a little more imaginative? Or are you a little more sensible? It's not that one's right or one's wrong. Which one? How's God made you? Are you a little more rational in thinking? Or are you a little bit more feeling and emotion? Which one are you? How has God made you? It's not that one's right or wrong. Are you a little bit more orderly? Or are you a little more spontaneous? Which one are you? Have you thought about it? Have you asked God to give you understanding about how He made you? That's a catalyst for your growth. As I understand how God's made me, I can live for Him more meaningfully. What if we go the other way? Not just in terms of creation gifts. What about spiritual gifts? Anyone familiar with spiritual gifts? Anyone heard the expression? Anyone heard the phrase? Can anyone say the phrase, spiritual gifts? You pass. In the New Testament, spiritual gifts are simply this. They're abilities that God gives to you so that you can move the kingdom forward in another person's life or in the world. That's all it is. It's an ability God gave you to move the kingdom forward, either in the life of a person or in the world. What did He give you? What are those gifts that He's given you? People wonder sometimes, well, I've heard about this and I don't really know what my gifts are. I really haven't thought about it. Let me give you at least three. Let me give you three handles to maybe figure out what some of your gifts may be. You ready? You have your pen and paper? Here's number one. Something might be a gift for you when you receive unsolicited affirmation about it. Unsolicited affirmation. You know what that means? I'll tell you what it means. Years ago, my brother told the story that there was a Sunday night service, and there was a gal that came up and was going to sing a special, and she sang, and apparently she thought she'd killed it. But nobody else seemed to think so. Except it was an awkward silence when she was done, and so Steve's wife, I guess to fill the silence or something, she responded with, huh. That's not unsolicited affirmation. Sometimes there are those that will make a presentation, then they're kind of trying to check to see and get some feedback. You know what? Unsolicited affirmation, where you don't have to fish for it, but people say, I appreciate your encouragement. I appreciate your talent. I appreciate your kindness. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate your organization. I appreciate your come alongside. I appreciate your creativity. What is it? Start thinking. Because when you receive unsolicited affirmation, pretty good chance it's a gift. Here's a better story than that. My brother can sing. He can sing the paint off the walls. He is really, really gifted as a singer. And I'm not. But you know what? I look like my brother. So Sundays, he would do a special, and he would have people, and they would be moved and hearts thrilled. And then after the service, a lot of the older folks would come and thank me and tell me what a great voice I had. And so you know what I told them? Thank you. It was unsolicited affirmation. Just not for me. Here's the second one. It's an indicator of a gift. If you can't imagine that someone else couldn't do it, if you can't imagine someone else couldn't do that, I look at some of the craftsman stuff that people do here, and the gifts that they have with that, and there's no way that I could do that. But when I talk to them, oh, well, you just do this and this and this, and like, no, yeah, I can't. If you can't imagine that someone else couldn't do it, or couldn't do it like that, it's probably a gift. Ever meet any of those folks that are magic with kids? You know what I mean? They're just magic. I remember years ago, our guys, we had a lady in the church. Her name was Deb. And when we would be doing stuff, she would watch the guys, and sometimes she would, was kind of their sitter and stuff like that. And I said, Deb, we really need you to kind of come alongside some of the folks who work with younger kids in the church and kind of help them. She said, well, you just do it. And I thought, no, we don't just do it. There are folks here who are magic with kids. You know what? To you, it's you just do it. Nuh-uh, that's a gift. How about this one? And then I'll move on. If you have to fight to suppress it, it might be a gift. If you are a teacher at heart and a teacher who's gifted and you're not the one teaching, and you have that urge to kind of say, oh, they're not bringing this up. Maybe if I share that a little bit, just drop that little comment in. You know what? You're having to fight to do that or fight to suppress it. If you have to fight to suppress it, it's probably a gift. Those who have the gift of helps that just are great to come alongside. I hear this, and I hear this at my house. Well, if that comes up again, I don't know. I'm going to have to be ready to say no somehow. Meaning what? It's a gift. There are those who have the gift of helps. And when you have to kind of fight to suppress it. How about this? Leaders among us, if you have to fight that to let somebody else take the lead, then you probably have a gift there. Control enthusiast. Whatever you want to call it. If you have to kind of fight to suppress it. There are some folks who are great organizers, and it kills them to watch somebody else organize stuff, especially if it's organized badly, and you have to kind of tamp that down. You know what I'm talking about? That's probably a gift. If you have a gift of hospitality and you realize there are people that aren't quite being greeted, but is this really my spot to do? And I have to kind of, no, you know what? That's a gift. It's a gift. What's God given you? How's He made you? To move His work forward in somebody, or to move His work forward in the world. One more. Passion. What stirs you? What ignites something in you? What moves you? What makes your heart pump fast? What is it? What are those things that energize you? People, I don't know. You can tell a mile away what things energize people. You can tell a mile away what stirs something in them. We discovered youth leaders here. We asked some people, hey, would you be interested to help with the youth ministry, middle school, high school? I knew we had hit it bullseye 2 different times. One of the first things we did was, remember, Sean, we went up to Rapid City for the, what's that called? What? Yeah, whatever he said. No. The little go-kart thing, remember? And paintball and all that stuff. And they're not here, so I'm going to talk freely. I tell you what, you could see the glint in Crystal Friesman's eyes a mile away. She was all about it. To this day, we just met with some of the youth leaders, and Tyler Banks and Chris DeVries were there, and it was energy in that room just talking about what do we want to do with youth this semester. What's going on with that? That tapped into their passion. You get it? There's some folks that, boy, they'll get fired up about the condition of the building and what needs to be repaired. You know why? Because it's a passion that they have. There are people who get really stoked up about community and groups. You know why? It's a passion that they have. What's your passion? Now look, God's heart is really big. And He is not some passive God. He's a very passionate God. You can't read the Scriptures and come away and think that God's some docile being. He's incredibly passionate. Now here's my question. Our passion is where He takes a piece of His heart and puts it in ours. He's passionate that lost people are touched and reached. Are you passionate about that? Did He put a piece of His heart for that into you? He's passionate that those who are limited as far as their ability to get out are cared for. There's some folks who have that piece of His heart in theirs. They're passionate about that. There are those that have a passion. He has a passion that His work in the world would be well run and well done. He's passionate about kids. He's passionate about youth. He's passionate about worship. What part of His heart did He place in yours? That's how He made you. God, give me understanding. Now, imagine with me, if you would, what would happen in a life? What would happen with you if you were to match up your gifts with what you're passionate about? Huh? What would happen? You would grow. What would happen? Lives would be touched. What would happen? The kingdom would move forward in a far more dynamic and effective way because we figured out what God's given us in terms of passion and in terms of gift. And those two things, when they line up, that's where exciting things happen and that's where we grow. How is it going to happen if you've never bothered to ask what your gifts are? If you never bothered to understand what your passion is? Have I said enough about that? We grow when we echo that request. God, you've made me. Your hand has fashioned me. Give me understanding. And last part. So that. It reads, that I may learn your commandments. We understand what that's about? It's not just collect more information. Learn your commandments means that I live more deeply, fully for you. Learning the commandments is simply an illustration to say, this is the means that we live more deeply and fully for God. Your hand has made me and fashioned me, so give me understanding. Why? Because I want to live more deeply and fully for you. That's amazing. And now for the reason we change from recognize to realize. To recognize something literally is to recall it or remember it, right? You recognize it, right? You re-know it. And it is possible to recognize potential and never go beyond recognition. But when we talk about realizing potential, you know what that means? To realize something means to make it real. I had a friend, he taught music. I don't know if this is formal instruction as far as music or not, but he used this example for me, and he says, there is a musical note that's written on the page, and we can say, yeah, that's music. He says, it's music, and it's written music, but it hasn't been realized yet. You know how you realize the music? You play it. I don't want to be a gathering where we only talk about recognizing potential. And we can look at it and we can see it and say, yes, there's some potential there. I want for us to be those who realize potential. That it goes from the page to we play it. It becomes real. How do you grow? You see your life the way God sees it. And next step, you've made me, give me understanding so that I can make potential real.